The incident occurred on a blistering Saturday in July at the Oakwood Reserve Community Pool, a private oasis of manicured lawns and sparkling blue water in a wealthy suburban enclave. Dr. Elias Vance, a new resident and a senior attorney for the Department of Justice, was attempting to take his 6-year-old daughter, Maya, for her first swim in their new neighborhood. He was confronted by another resident, Carolyn Finch, who, based on nothing more than the color of his skin, accused him of trespassing. The confrontation escalated when Mrs. Finch physically blocked his child from entering the water and declared that she was not comfortable with his kind swimming with her children. What she failed to realize was that the quiet, unassuming man in swim trunks she was harassing was not only a resident with every right to be there, but also one of the federal government's leading litigators on civil rights violations, and she had just made herself the subject of his next case. The sun beat down with an oppressive, humid weight, the kind that made the air itself feel thick and heavy. For Dr. Elias Vance, it was the perfect day to be a father and nothing more. The title, the degrees, the crushing weight of his caseload at the Department of Justice. He had left all of it in his briefcase at home. Here, by the shimmering, chlorine-scented water of the Oakwood Reserve Pool, he was just dad. He wore a faded Georgetown Hoyas t-shirt, simple navy swim trunks, and a pair of worn flip-flops. His daughter, Maya, was a whirlwind of joyous energy beside him, her bright pink floaties already strapped to her arms, her small hand clutching his tightly. She bounced on the balls of her feet, her eyes wide with the wonder that only a 6-year-old can feel for a large body of water on a hot day. They had closed on the house on Sterling Drive 3 weeks ago, and this was their inaugural visit to the community's crown jewel. The air was filled with the sounds of summer, the shrieks of happy children, the rhythmic splash of a diver hitting the water, the low murmur of parental chatter from beneath the shade of large, white umbrellas. It was, by all appearances, an idyllic scene, a portrait of suburban tranquility they had bought into. From the moment they passed through the electronic gate using the temporary code the realtor had given them, Elias felt the subtle shift. A few conversations paused. A few heads turned. He was used to it. He was a black man in a predominantly white space, a familiar calculus of gazes and assumptions that he had learned to navigate with a practiced, weary calm. He chose a pair of empty lounge chairs near the shallow end, a safe distance from the more boisterous teenagers cannonballing into the deep. As he laid out their towels, he noticed a woman watching them. She was sitting with 2 young boys who looked to be around 8 and 10, her posture ramrod straight, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and expensive-looking sunglasses, but even from a distance, the intensity of her stare was palpable. It wasn't curiosity, it was scrutiny. Elias met her gaze for a brief second, offered a small, polite nod, and then turned his attention back to Maya, who was already tugging at his hand, desperate to get in the water. He refused to let this woman's hostility poison this moment for his daughter. This was their home now. They belonged here. He took off his shirt and folded it neatly on the chair. "Okay, sweetie, let's go over the rules one more time," he said, crouching down to Maya's level. "No running, stay where I can see you, and what do we do if you need help?" Maya giggled, her pigtails bouncing. "Yell for daddy. That's my girl." As they walked hand in hand toward the wide, Roman-style steps of the shallow end, the woman stood up. She moved with a stiff, deliberate gait, placing herself directly in their path. Her name, though Elias did not know it yet, was Carolyn Finch, and she had appointed herself the sole guardian of the pool's unwritten code. "Excuse me," she said. The words were polite, but her tone was sharp, accusatory. It was the voice of someone who did not expect to be questioned. Elias stopped, instinctively pulling Maya a little closer behind him. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice even and calm. Carolyn Finch's eyes, hidden behind the dark lenses of her sunglasses, swept over him, from his simple t-shirt to his generic swim trunks. It was a clear, dismissive appraisal. "This is a private pool," she stated, not asked. "It's for residents of Oakwood Reserve only." Elias maintained his placid expression. "I'm aware. We're residents. We just moved in on Sterling Drive." He offered the information freely, hoping to de-escalate the situation before it even began. A simple misunderstanding, he told himself. She's just being protective of her community. But Carolyn was not interested in explanations. His answer seemed to only deepen her suspicion. I've lived here for 12 years, she announced, as if her tenure granted her judicial authority. I know everyone on Sterling Drive. I've never seen you before. Her implication was clear. If she didn't know him, he couldn't possibly belong. The conversation was no longer a private matter. The families nearby had quieted down, their attention now fixed on the unfolding drama. Elias could feel the weight of their collective gaze. We closed a few weeks ago, he said, his patience beginning to fray at the edges. The Hendersons' old place. We're still unpacking. He was providing verifiable facts, but she waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a fly. I'm going to need to see your resident key card, she demanded. Her voice was louder now, carrying across the water. Her two sons had stopped their splashing and were watching their mother with a mixture of confusion and learned arrogance. Elias took a slow, deliberate breath. This was the crossroads. He could engage, escalate, or retreat. But retreating was not an option. Not with Maya watching, not in his own neighborhood. We haven't received our permanent cards yet, he explained, keeping his tone measured. They're being mailed. I have the closing documents and our new utility bills on my phone if you need to see proof of residency. He was offering a perfectly reasonable solution, but for Carolyn Finch, this was not about rules or residency. It was about control. I don't want to see your phone, she snapped. Anyone can fake a document. You need a key card. It's the rule. She crossed her arms, a solid, unmoving wall of suburban prejudice. Maya, sensing the tension, tightened her grip on his hand. Her lower lip began to tremble. This was what angered Elias the most. His daughter's perfect summer day was being tarnished by this woman's bigotry. Ma'am, he said, his voice dropping slightly, losing its gentle edge and gaining a firmer, more serious timbre. I assure you, we are residents. We have every right to be here. Now, if you'll excuse us, I'd like to take my daughter for a swim. He made a move to step around her, but she shifted her body, physically blocking their path to the steps. And then, she uttered the words that would irrevocably alter the course of her afternoon, and likely her life. As Maya tried to peek around her father's leg to get to the water, Carolyn looked down at the little girl. A sneer twisted her lips. She then looked back up at Elias, her voice dripping with venomous certainty. I'm not comfortable with your kind swimming with my children. The air went still. The cheerful sounds of the pool seemed to fade into a dull, distant roar. For a moment, Elias felt a hot, white flash of pure rage. It was an old, familiar fury, one he had spent a lifetime learning to control, to channel, to weaponize in a courtroom, but never in his personal life. He looked from Carolyn's hate-filled face down to his daughter's, which was now crumbling into confusion and fear. He saw the exact moment the poison of racism first touched his child's innocence. That, more than any insult to him, was the unforgivable sin. He took another deep, grounding breath, and when he spoke, his voice was chillingly quiet. The calm father was gone, replaced by the formidable prosecutor. What did you just say? He asked. It wasn't a request for clarification. It was a demand for her to place her statement on the record. Carolyn seemed to gain confidence from his quiet response, mistaking it for weakness. You heard me, she said, her chin jutting out defiantly. This is a family community. We have certain standards. My children's safety and comfort come first. The implication was grotesque and clear. His very presence, the color of his skin, was a threat to her children's safety. Around them, the silent audience was no longer pretending not to watch. Several people were now sitting up straighter in their lounge chairs. A teenager sitting by the snack bar, who had been scrolling on his phone, now held it up, its camera lens pointing directly at them. The recording had begun. Elias did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He met her gaze and held it, his eyes like chips of obsidian. So, to be perfectly clear, he began, his cadence slow and deliberate, as if he were cross-examining a hostile witness. You are denying my daughter, a 6-year-old child, access to this community facility, a facility for which we pay homeowner association dues, based on her race? He used the word race deliberately. A legal grenade rolled gently into the conversation. Carolyn flinched. The word hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. That's not what I said, she stammered, her bravado beginning to crack. I said you're kind, I'm just concerned. You don't have a key card. You could be anyone my kind? Elias repeated, letting the phrase echo. Please, define that for me, ma'am. What kind am I? He was dismantling her, piece by piece, using her own words against her. The other pool-goers were now openly whispering. A man in a nearby chair shook his head in disgust. A woman quickly gathered her own children and moved to the far side of the pool, wanting no part of the ugliness but doing nothing to stop it. Carolyn, feeling the social ground shifting beneath her, decided to appeal to a higher authority. Security, she yelled, her voice shrill and panicked. Security, over here. We have a trespasser. A young man in a light blue polo shirt with an Oakwood security patch on the sleeve jogged over. He looked barely out of his teens, his face a mask of anxiety. His name tag read Kevin. What's the problem, Mrs. Finch? He asked, his eyes darting between the irate woman and the composed black man. This man refuses to leave, Carolyn declared, pointing a trembling finger at Elias. He has no key card, and he's being aggressive. He's scaring the children. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, that Elias almost laughed. He had not moved, had not raised his voice, had not made a single threatening gesture. Kevin the security guard turned to him, clearly intimidated by Mrs. Finch's histrionics. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to show me your resident ID or leave the premises. This was the moment the institution became complicit. Elias looked at the young guard, not with anger, but with a kind of weary disappointment. Son, he said, his voice firm but not unkind, this woman is engaged in racially motivated harassment. I have already offered to provide proof of residency via my closing documents, which she refused to look at. I am a homeowner here. I am not leaving. He then shifted his attention back to Carolyn. You made an accusation. You've involved security. This is now an official incident. I hope you're prepared for the consequences. His calm, legalistic language seemed to unnerve her more than shouting would have. Consequences? You're the one who's going to face consequences when the police get here, she shrieked, pulling out her own phone. I'm calling 911. That would be a mistake, Elias advised, his tone dangerously soft. Filing a false police report is a criminal offense. And given that your complaint is transparently based on racial animus, it could also open you up to significant civil liability. Kevin the security guard looked utterly lost. He was a summer hire, trained to check for key cards and tell kids not to run, not to mediate a burgeoning civil rights dispute. Ma'am, maybe we should call the property manager first, he suggested weakly. But Carolyn was too far gone. Her rage and embarrassment blinding her to the cliff edge she was gleefully dancing on. As she furiously stabbed at her phone, Elias made a decision. The time for quiet de-escalation was over. He had given her every opportunity to walk away. Now, she would learn a lesson. He pulled his own phone from the small dry bag he carried and dialed a number from his contacts. He let it ring once, then spoke. Yes, I need to speak with the community manager. Henderson, I believe his name is. Tell him Dr. Elias Vance wishes to speak with him at the pool immediately. It's a matter concerning a potential violation of the Fair Housing Act. The use of his title, Dr. Vance, and the specific, legalistic threat of a Fair Housing Act violation was a calculated shot across the bow. Kevin's eyes widened. Carolyn paused her 911 call, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face for the first time. The name, Henderson, and the legal jargon had clearly registered. A few minutes later, a portly, balding man in a golf shirt and khaki shorts came bustling out of the clubhouse, his face slick with sweat. This was Mr. Henderson, the property manager. What on earth is going on here? He demanded, trying to project an authority he clearly did not feel. Carolyn immediately launched into her narrative. Robert, thank God. This man, she gestured at Elias, forced his way in here. He has no ID. He's threatening me, and he's refusing to leave. You have to remove him. Henderson looked at Elias, his expression a mixture of exasperation and prejudice. It was easier to believe the hysterical, long-time resident than the quiet black man she was accusing. Sir, Henderson began, his tone condescending. Let's not make this a bigger deal than it needs to be. If you just show me some ID, we can clear this all up. If not, I'll have to ask you to go. Elias looked at the manager, then at Carolyn Finch, who was now smirking triumphantly. He looked at the ring of silent witnesses, and he looked down at his daughter, who was hiding behind his legs, her dream of a day at the pool completely shattered. He had had enough. My identification, Elias said slowly, his voice resonating with a newfound power that made everyone fall silent, is not the issue here. The issue is a resident, Mrs. Finch, creating a hostile environment and denying access to a facility based on race, a direct violation of Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. The issue is your security staff, represented by Kevin here, attempting to enforce this discriminatory act. And the issue, Mr. Henderson, is your immediate assumption of my guilt without any investigation, which makes the Oakwood Reserve Community Association complicit in this action. He reached into the pocket of his swim trunks, into the waterproof pouch, where he kept his keys and one other item. He pulled out a worn leather wallet. It wasn't a driver's license he produced. He flipped it open to reveal a gold shield and a laminated card with his photograph. The text was stark and unmistakable. He held it up for Henderson to see. Elias Vance, he said, his voice now devoid of all warmth, cold and hard as steel. Senior Trial Attorney, Civil Rights Division, United States Department of Justice. My job, Mr. Henderson, is to prosecute people and organizations for violations of federal law. And you all, he said, his gaze sweeping from Carolyn to Kevin to Henderson, are having a very, very bad day. The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the sound from the poolside. Carolyn Finch's triumphant smirk dissolved, her face turning a sickly, pale white. The color drained from her cheeks as if a plug had been pulled. Her jaw hung open, her mouth forming a perfect, silent O of disbelief. Mr. Henderson squinted at the credentials, his eyes widening in horror as he read the words. Department of Justice. He took an involuntary step backward, as if the small leather wallet had physically pushed him. Kevin the security guard looked like he was about to be sick. The crowd of onlookers, who had been whispering amongst themselves, were now utterly still, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The teenager with the phone camera now held it up boldly, ensuring he captured every second of the spectacular reversal. Elias let the moment hang in the air, the weight of his authority settling over the scene like a shroud. He slowly closed the wallet and tucked it away. He was no longer just a dad in swim trunks. He was the full, embodied power of the federal government. As of this moment, Elias continued, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable force of a legal deposition, I am officially opening a preliminary inquiry. Mr. Henderson, I will require the full name and contact information for Mrs. Finch. I will also need a copy of the association's bylaws, all governing documents related to facility access, and any and all incident reports filed by your security staff today. Furthermore, I am placing a legal hold on all security camera footage from all angles of this pool area for the last 3 hours. Do you understand? Henderson, looking utterly shell-shocked, could only nod mutely, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Elias then turned his piercing gaze to Carolyn, who now seemed to shrink before him. Mrs. Finch, he said, using her name with surgical precision, your statement, and I'm quoting, that you were not comfortable with my kind swimming with your children, will be the centerpiece of this investigation. Given the number of witnesses here, and the fact that this entire exchange has likely been recorded, I would strongly advise you to retain legal counsel. Immediately, the mention of witnesses and recordings sent a fresh wave of panic across Carolyn's face. She looked around wildly, her eyes landing on the teenager's phone, then on the other faces staring at her, no longer with curiosity, but with cold judgment. She was no longer the enforcer, she was the exhibit. She finally found her voice, but it was a pathetic, trembling version of its former self. No, wait. I didn't mean it like that, she stammered, wringing her hands. It was a misunderstanding. I was just worried about security. I'm not a racist. I have friends who are, she trailed off, the cliché dying on her lips under Elias's unblinking stare. The time for explanations has passed, Elias said flatly. You will have an opportunity to explain yourself to investigators from my office. He then turned his back on her, a gesture of complete and utter dismissal. He knelt to his daughter. All the hardness in his face melted away, replaced by the gentle concern of a loving father. Hey, sweetie, he whispered. I'm so sorry that happened. That lady was wrong, and she's in a lot of trouble. But she's not going to bother us anymore. Do you still want to go for a swim? Maya looked up at him, her eyes still watery, and then she looked at the sparkling blue water. She gave a small, hesitant nod. Okay, Elias said softly. Let's go. He stood up, took her hand, and with the entire pool community watching in stunned silence, he walked past the petrified forms of Carolyn Finch and Robert Henderson and led his daughter down the steps and into the cool, welcoming water. The splash they made as they entered was the only sound that broke the silence, a sound of rightful entry, of a battle won, of a space reclaimed. He held Maya in his arms, letting her float, and for the first time that day, she smiled. He had not only protected his daughter, he had shown her that injustice, no matter how ugly, could be faced and defeated.